Closet, a Todd Mills mystery. Book 1. Author R.D. Zimmerman. Publisher Scribble Pub. Minneapolis, Minnesota. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 14. Todd couldn't let go of it. The idea lodged in his mind, and he could think of nothing else. The actual interment was limited to the family and took place an hour after the chapel service had concluded. Todd and Maggie and her family stood at Michael's grave, his coffin hovering over the open pit, while the minister spoke, still more prayers and thoughts. But Todd heard precious little. Instead, he stood there, the late autumn sun on his shoulders, wanting Michael back just for a minute. There was just one thing he wanted to tell Michael. "I love you," and one thing he wanted to ask. Was there someone else? The grass was clipped short, fading from its summer brightness to an autumnal dullness, and Todd's eyes drifted away from the grave, down the hill, past all the other gravestones, and to the pond below. He watched a handful of ducks skim the surface of the water, settle down, float there, and then Maggie was pulling on Todd's sleeve. "It was over." "I'll be right there," he told her. "You'll go ahead." Maggie and Rick and their kids followed the minister down the slope toward the narrow paved road, where they started walking back to the chapel. Todd watched them, then turned back to the coffin, which seemed to float magically above the open hole. He'd been so obsessed by his own secret, that of his sexuality, that Todd hadn't seen how self-centered it had made him. Certainly there could have been something or someone in Michael's life that Todd didn't know about. An old boyfriend, someone from the past, or some new guy, someone Michael had flirted with at work or the gym. Sure, it was possible. Maybe Michael had wanted to tell Todd about this person. Or maybe Todd had driven Michael away, forced him into a secret of his own. A closet of a different kind. Yeah, that was possible. Perhaps likely, but why, thought Todd, didn't that feel right? Their closest moments emotionally were when the lights were out and they were in bed, side by side. It was only then that everyone and everything was blocked out, or rather, it was only then that the entire world seemed to spark from their love and passion. When Todd held Michael in his arms, when he was assured that no one was watching and judging, and that the expectations of the world were blind to them both. He knew this was right, the two of them. There was no paranoid doublethink, no wondering if others were looking, staring, hating. There was just the purity of the moment, the honesty of their emotions. "Here," Michael had said sometime last winter when the temperature had plummeted to 20 below and they had slipped naked beneath the down comforter. "Put your forehead against mine. There. Now, I can't tell where you stop and I begin." Todd had held him tighter, pressed him closer. For all that Todd had known was what he'd said. "I love you." He told Michael that, hadn't he? Yes, absolutely. Then and any number of other times, in spite of that horrible fight just a few nights ago. Even though Todd had smashed that champagne and broken all those dishes, Michael had to have known how much Todd cared. God, he hoped so. As wretched as these past days had been, Todd only prayed that in the end Michael never doubted Todd's love for him. Todd now shook his head. He'd screwed it all up, their relationship and so much more. Yes, he told Michael how much he cared for him, but at the same time, Todd kept throwing up barricades, thereby preventing things from becoming truly great. Not long ago, Michael and he had gone downtown to Dayton's, that massive department store in the Nicollet Mall, and instead of perusing the clothes and enjoying just being out with Michael, Todd had worried what the clerks were thinking. Sure, they were looking at Todd. Sure, they recognized him as the star reporter. And yes, they were closely watching how intimately he was talking with Michael. How Todd was asking for Michael's opinions on his shirt, that colors. So, what were the clerks thinking? That he was queer? Were they recognizing the truth? Would someone find out? So what if they had? Todd thought now. It wouldn't have made any difference then or any other time. he thought, shaking his head, understanding how much he'd twisted things. If anything, most of the male clerks had to be gay, and yet Todd denied his sexuality to them and thereby denied them a potentially positive role model. You know, Michael had said more than once, a queer like you, responsible, intelligent, masculine, not to mention on TV all the time, would be a very positive thing to a lot of people. A lot of gays would look up to you, and a lot of straights would be amazed because the only gays they see are the visible ones. You know, the swishy kind. Perhaps it was simply that ever since he was a child, Todd had been equally fearful of rejection and approval. Fears that over the years had manifested in his own homophobia. But now, just as he had to let go of the man he loved, he had to let go of all that self-hatred. Todd reached over, touched the edge of the coffin, and just stood there. 5 blank minutes passed. And then, with tears once again in his eyes, he softly said, "Sleep tight, dear friend. I'll always love you." He turned and walked away from the suspended coffin, back toward the chapel. Glancing toward a distant street, he saw someone peering through the wrought iron fence, and he saw that someone holding something. A camera? Shit, he realized. Always people watching him, judging. That was a photographer with a telephoto taking Todd's picture. Had he gotten the whole thing? Todd and Maggie and all gathered around the gravesite. They piled into 2 cars, Rick's Oldsmobile and Todd's Cherokee, which the police had just returned, and then they drove the 6 blocks to Uptown, the small, trendy neighborhood packed with shops and cafes. As planned, they met Janice at a small restaurant, Cafe Laurie, where she'd already commandeered a large corner table for a late lunch. It was a simple establishment, the walls tall and white, the food simple but elegant, and Todd sat with his back toward the main part of the room. He didn't want to be recognized, he didn't want to be disturbed, and they weren't. When they were done, Todd pleaded exhaustion. Janice wanted to come back to his apartment, sit with him for a while. Maggie couldn't hide her concern, wanted him to come out to her place for the night, so he wouldn't be alone, but Todd declined. "I'll be okay," he assured them all. "I can't believe it. You're turning into a Minnesota martyr," Janice said, referring to the staunch and inexpressive Scandinavian types that were so prevalent in the area. "No, I just need some downtime." So by sunset he was home and out on his 15th floor balcony, wrapped in a jacket and watching the last of the joggers and walkers make their way around Lake Calhoun. He sat there, the evening chill whooshing into the city, the sky fading from blue to orange to red, then back to a deep dark blue, and still he couldn't let go of that thought. It wasn't so much that he feared there had been someone else in Michael's life. He didn't feel betrayed or jealous. He just wanted to know, to put things in perspective. Todd saw how much of the world he'd blocked out by being so closeted, how distant he'd kept so much and so many. But now he wondered, feared that he'd blocked out a good deal of Michael as well, and of course he had to know if this other person, if indeed there was one, might have been the one who'd visited death upon Michael. Todd knew who he had to talk to. It was dark out now and cold, and he left the balcony and went to the kitchen where he looked up a phone number that had been scribbled on a list. He then went to the dining room, sat at the glass table, and picked up the phone. The line was answered on the 4th ring. "Hey there," said the big voice in the answer machine. "This is indeed Jeff, and I don't know where I am, but you know where you can find me, Wednesday through Sunday, rain or shine." It was late in the week, and Todd did in fact know where he could find Jeff, but not yet, if he remembered correctly. Jeff didn't begin performing at the gay times until 9. But would he go on stage tonight? Did rain or shine include the funeral of your oldest and closest friend? Todd had only been down to the gay times once, about 3 years ago, at Michael's insistence. They'd gone down one Saturday night to see Jeff's show, but it had been risky for Todd. The new segment at Channel 7 was just starting up. His career was just gaining some momentum, and he didn't want to jeopardize anything by prancing into a gay bar with only Michael. So instead, they'd made an evening of it, inviting Maggie and Rick and Janice. They'd all gone out to dinner beforehand, then arrived in mixed couples at the gay times and taken a front and center table. Sure, some people recognized him, but the gay bar was straight friendly, as Michael always said, and no one knew what to make of Todd's presence. God, how stupid. Todd now thought, how really queer. He didn't hesitate to 9, however, and as it approached 9, Todd got into his car and headed downtown. He drove down Hennepin Avenue, that lively and somewhat tawdry street of entertainment, and parked in a lot less than a block away from the Gay Times. As he approached the building, he saw the flashing lights and the other men heading toward the place and heard the muffled thumping music as it filtered onto the street. The Gay Times was the biggest gay bar in the area, and it was always growing, gobbling up more space, annexing neighboring buildings. When Todd had been here before, there were just a couple of bars and only 2 dance floors. But it had mushroomed in recent years, or so Michael had reported, claiming that it was now a complex of 10 or more bars, and as soon as Todd walked in the front door, he saw what Michael had been talking about. Although it was still early, and the place wouldn't fill up until 11 or 12, the huge main room was filled with tables of guys eating dinner. To the left, he saw another room with a long bar, and to his right, he heard the pumping and throbbing of dance music coming from a distant room. Todd stood on the edge of the main room, and more than a couple of tables turned his way. Sure, they recognized him, if not from television, then from the recent scandal. Feeling as if he were going live on the air, the alter ego voice of his agent, Stella, popped out of nowhere. If you ever want to make it big in broadcast, she had advised shrewdly, don't ever let your waist get bigger than your chest. I'm talking about if you want to go to the top, doll, and I know you do, and I know you can. In fact, if you can make sure your waist is about a third smaller than your chest, any more than that, and you'll look artificial, like a squeezed toothpaste tube, and people will think you're dumb and cheap. Then I can guarantee I can get you on the nationals. I think you'd fit in at CBS. Connie would love you, and don't forget about the dental bleaching. Get that set up right away. Todd shook his head. Tried to block Stella out. It was time for his public and private lives to merge. It didn't matter how people perceived him anymore, and with a sense of relief, Todd realized that coming in here didn't make him feel nervous. He didn't feel threatened as he used to whenever he went into a gay bar, which was usually in some distant city like Dallas or New York. He turned right and headed up a staircase, passing a mezzanine where a guy in a baseball jacket stood with a bowl of condoms and a big admonishing smile, saying, "Don't forget to dress up tonight, boys." Todd continued to the top of the stairs where he turned to the right and stepped into a long pool hall with a motorcycle on the wall. Butch-looking guys in plaid shirts and jeans were standing around shooting pool, drinking beer, laughing. One handsome, thickly built guy who looked like a construction worker. And then again, thought Todd, maybe he was a lawyer by day and a pretend construction worker by night. Walked past Todd, gave him a friendly smile and a deep stare. Maybe some other time, thought Todd, but not this week, not this month. He passed through the room, turned again to the right, and entered the piano lounge, a small, intimate room with a baby grand in the middle, a striking black woman with short hair and a rich, melodic voice sang and played. And Todd looked around. There were a dozen or so couches with couples seated about, men and men, women and women, black and black, white and white, black and white. Cocktails in hand, except for the diversity, it reminded Todd of a Polish piano bar in Chicago. He continued on, passing through a coffee bar where 2 women were laughing over cappuccinos in one corner and 3 guys were deep in conversation by the window. He came to another dance hall, a huge, dark room with raucous music. He saw guys in black leather pants, leather vests, leather shirts, and chains, lots of them draping from waist over crotches. Some were dancing next to a beat-up old wire fence. No, thought Todd, Jeff wouldn't be here. Definitely not his scene. It wasn't Michael's either. Michael had been encouraging Todd to relax, to be himself. Just because you're gay, he told Todd, doesn't mean you fit neatly into a stereotype. It doesn't mean you like bouquets of pink flowers and little dogs. It doesn't mean you like to watch figure skating and have a museum-sized collection of cologne. It doesn't mean you have to be super macho either. Look at me, Michael had said. I'm gay, and I'm an excellent accountant. And I read the sports page every day. We're a whole spectrum of people, Todd. Just look at you. You're a great journalist. You work incredibly hard. You're too serious. And you love to change the oil in your car. The only thing that might tip someone off that you're queer is that your socks always match your shirt. Either that or those deep, penetrating blue eyes of yours that tend to linger a millisecond too long on one half of the population. Oh, Michael, thought Todd. Who's going to balance my checkbook now? Todd turned and headed down another hallway, following the arrows to the showroom. He glanced up at the wall, and immediately everything drained out of him. He froze, leaned against a doorframe. Oh, Christ. A small poster was taped on the wall opposite him. On the poster was Michael's face. Todd started reading and started shaking. Wanted information on the murder of our dear friend, Michael Carter. The night before he was killed, Michael was seen at the Gay Times. If you saw Michael leave with anyone, please notify. Todd couldn't focus on the words. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply and slowly, then opened his eyes, stared again at the poster. A grinning picture of Michael was staring back at him. How was any of this possible? And is that what you did, Michael? Did you come down here after we fought? Quite obviously so, thought Todd. Michael hadn't curled up with a book. He hadn't gone to the gym and worked off the tension of their argument. They'd had that horrible fight. Todd had rushed out, and then Michael had left the house as well. To do what? Have a drink with Jeff? Hang out with some other friends? Or meet a replacement for Todd Mills? A voice behind him said, We haven't had any calls yet. Todd turned, saw someone standing there, a bottle of beer in hand, and couldn't quite manage a reply. But I'm hoping we're going to get some, said Detective Steve Rawlings in black jeans and a t-shirt. Todd was so stunned to see him in this crowd of men that he didn't know what to say and only managed to mutter, What the hell are you doing here? Guys. Todd looked around. Detective Rawlings? Here? What? Replied Todd. Come on, dude. Your head's not stuck that deep in the sand, is it? You knew I was gay, didn't you? Oh, well, no, actually. I mean, what was all that about your first lover? I was talking about a guy, you dumb shit, laughed Rawlings, who then took a slug of beer. I thought you'd already figured me out. Huh? Confused and overwhelmed, Todd didn't know what to say, and he turned back to the poster. I'm surprised to see this. Well, don't be. The entire gay community is afraid. This is a hate crime, and everyone's up in arms. I think 500 of these things were photocopied and plastered around town. Haven't you seen them? They're everywhere. I haven't really been out. I haven't seen it before. Todd quickly studied Rawlings. Really? Queer? And then hesitantly asked, So Michael was down here? Didn't you know? No, how would I? Michael, did he mention it? Of course not, said Todd defensively. I didn't talk to him after our fight. I told you that. Oh, yeah. Right. So what? What was Michael doing here? Having a good time, I guess. But, what did... Todd didn't want to ask, but he had to know. Did he go home with anyone? Do you know that for a fact? Rawlings looked away. No. Theirs had been a monogamous relationship, or so Todd had always thought. But had the fight changed all that? Could Todd's loss of temper have convinced Michael that the relationship was no good and it was time to move on? A frightening scene passed through Todd's imagination. What if Todd had returned to Michael's that night? What if he'd found Michael in bed with some other guy? Todd would have gone truly ballistic, or would he have just cracked, dropped into tears, and Utter confusion. He hoped the later. He feared the former. He wouldn't have hurt Michael, would he? Could he have? Exactly what were his limits? "What do you think?" asked Rawlings. "Did he usually pick up guys? Was he into cruising?" "What? Michael? No, hell no." "Well, you never know. Some guys cheat all the time on their wives. Some guys cheat all the time on their boyfriends." "But not Michael. We talked," Todd wanted to say. "We talked about our desires, our fantasies. How Joe Blow was incredibly hunky. What a great body he had. Who we wanted to sleep with. Why we wouldn't. How important we were to each other. We talked, and we had a great sex life. No. If Michael had been sleeping with someone else, he wouldn't have been able not to tell me, right?" Rawlings grinned and glanced around. "So, what are you doing here? Out for a good time? Actually, I don't think I've ever seen you down here before." "What? You got your eye on anyone?" "No. I..." He shook his head quickly. "Not at all." How could Rawlings even think that? They just buried Michael this afternoon. "I'm looking for Michael's friend, Jeff," Todd said quickly. I wanted to talk to him." "I see." Rawlings took a swig of beer, gazed down at the floor, and then looked up with a grin. "Can I buy you a drink?" Stunned, Todd saw no other way than to be direct. He asked, "What are you doing? Hitting on me? A good-looking guy like you?" "What would make you think that?" He gave Todd a firm pat on the shoulder, said, "Take care of yourself, buddy, and be safe. There's an epidemic out there." Rawlings then turned and cut into a crowd of men, his broad shoulders and trim waist not going unnoticed by a handful of guys. Todd stared after him as well, then turned back to the poster, looked into Michael's frozen eyes. What the hell had all that been about? Moving on, pushing down the hall and toward the show lounge, Todd just had this scene of course Rawlings wasn't being forthright. From being so closeted for so long, Todd knew how to recognize that screening technique. The way you make people look at the surface of you and let them think they're seeing every sincere inch. It was like a one-way mirror, while the real you was lurking back there unseen. People saw what they wanted to see. So had Rawlings purposely bumped into Todd in a deliberate effort to pick him up? Or had he followed him to the Gay Times in an attempt to squeeze as much information out of Todd as possible? Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.